Hello and welcome to today's episode of My Eye Bags seem to be getting progressively worse and worse throughout this quarantine time. I've also cut my finger open today, which means I need to take rest every now and again to feel a little bit sorry for myself, because every time I move my finger the flesh pulls apart and it makes me feel very, very sick. I'm a very squeamish person, which doesn't bode well for my career path. I want to be a crime writer. I write crime. I am a crime writer. I don't want to be a crime. I am a crime writer. Positive thinking. I am a crime writer. I write about crime. And I'm very, very squeamish. So every time I'm writing about a murder or something, or finding a body or an autopsy, I have to put my head between my legs for a little bit and just sort of deep breathe. Those scenes take me the longest to write because I just feel sick all the time. I take inspiration from real life crimes because sometimes real life is more horrific than you could actually imagine and think up. Stuff like McCamey Manor, which is like a genuine torture house that happens. People go in there, people want to be tortured voluntarily, and I couldn't make that up. That's a real thing that happens. So a lot of films take the same path and take inspiration from real life crimes, and today I'm going to be talking about 3 of those films and the crimes that inspired them. Welcome to True Crime Tuesday. This is now going to be a thing. I'm going to be talking about true crime on a Tuesday on this channel. If you like that kind of stuff, subscribe, because there will be a lot of crime happening. Talking about it, I won't be committing any crimes. That's bad. But I'll be talking about crimes. I find it very interesting. Let's begin. The first film I'm going to talk about is The Hounds of Love, and that was made in 2016, and it's about a young girl who gets lured into a car and taken to the house of a young couple, a seemingly trustworthy couple. Oh boy, were they not a trustworthy couple, and she ends up being imprisoned, tortured, and whatnot. What the Wikipedia summary of this film describes it as is she gets caught up in a world of extreme violence and domination. Now, this film drew inspiration from the real-life Burney murders that happened in 1986. David and Catherine Burney met at a young age. David was 14, Catherine was 12, and they became friends. They started dating for a while, and then they ended up being separated due to own individual stints in prison. David was a serial rapist, and Catherine went to jail for other various petty crimes. David was convicted of rape, and he developed a severe porn and sex addiction, as well as being a paraphilic, which means he has sexual attraction to children, non-consenting adults, and inanimate objects. Catherine married a man called Donald McLaughlin after working for his family, and they had 7 children together. After her 7th was born, she met up with David again and they began living together. She changed her surname legally to match his, and they began fantasizing about rape and murder together. They lured 5 victims to their Australian suburban home. They were repeatedly raped, strangled with a nylon cord, and stabbed in the back. They were all taken away from the house and buried in a shallow grave near the house. Now, the final victim ended up escaping, and she was forced to call her friends and family to say she had been staying with a friend, so no one would suspect that she'd been kidnapped at all, and no one would file a missing persons report and come looking for her. But when Catherine went downstairs to answer the door, she snuck out of the bedroom window and ran to the local shop and called the police. And Catherine and David were then apprehended. The girls' names were Mary Nielsen, Susanna Candy, Noeline Patterson, Denise Brown, and Kate Moir. I find it really important to, if I know the names of the victims, I will say the names of the victims, because it's respectful to do so. David pled guilty to murder, saying that it was the least he could do to respect the victims' families after what he did to them. And he also pled guilty to 1 count of rape and 1 count of abduction. Both David and Catherine were both sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences, meaning 100 years in prison. But David ended up committing suicide in prison the day before he was due to stand trial for the rape of a fellow prisoner. Catherine applied for parole in 2007, but it was denied. She also applied again in 2010, but in 2009, her papers were reviewed by an Australian judge, and she is one of 2 women in Australia to have her papers marked never to be released. The second film I'm going to talk about is called Henry, the Portrait of a Serial Killer. Now this came out in 1986 and it's all about Henry, a serial killer. He is a nomadic serial killer, meaning he drifts from town to town, killing random people as he goes, so there's no way to connect him to the murders apart from where he is. This is based on the life of Henry Lee Lucas, whose crimes spanned from 1960 to 1983. In 1960, Henry killed his own mother by stabbing her in the neck after she went to hit him with a broom to punish him for something. He was sentenced to 30 to 40 years in prison, but only served 10, getting out because of prison overcrowding. In 1971, he served 5 years for trying to kidnap 3 schoolgirls. In 1983, he murdered elderly Kate Rich and teenage Frida Powell. He was arrested, but then went on this strange confession spree where he confessed to loads of murders he didn't actually commit. He went down for committing 11 murders, including the murder of a lady called Deborah Jackson, who was known to the media as Orange Socks because that's all they knew about her at the time. She was found wearing orange socks, so they named her Orange Socks until she was identified as Deborah Jackson. They eventually cleared about 213 cases due to his false confessions, but then they went through and decided that maybe he wasn't guilty of doing those at all because he had no reason to. They gave him case files to look over and he started confessing to things that he saw in the case files rather than actually committing the murders, so he was deemed a bit of a loony bin for that one. But he was sentenced to death for the murder of Deborah Jackson. He was sentenced to death for the murder of Deborah Jackson, but this was later changed to life in prison. In 1996, there was a mad set of films called Scream, starring that thing with the ghost face and Courtney Cox. I didn't realise this happened during her time in Friends. I thought it was before Friends, and it was a weird thing she did, like before Friends, like when Jennifer Aniston did that Goblin film, but apparently she did it on purpose. The Scream films were based on the Gainesville Ripper, who committed all of his murders in 1994 over a 2-day period. He murdered 5 victims over the course of a couple of days in 1994. So he broke into an apartment shared by Sonia Larson and Christine Powell. My notes are down here and I want to make sure I get people's names right, so I will be... He broke into an apartment shared by Christina Powell and Sonia Larson. Larson died fending him off, and Powell was later murdered by being bound, gagged, raped and stabbed. He also took a shower before leaving the apartment, which is very strange. He then broke into Christina Hoyt's apartment and did the same thing to her that he did to Powell. He bound, gagged and raped her, stabbed her in the back. The only difference with Christina Hoyt is he cut off her head and displayed it on the mantelpiece, looking at her own decapitated body to shock whoever found her later on. These murders were starting to gain press coverage by now. The first 2 murders happened on a Friday and the second murder happened on a Saturday, and they were starting to gain a little bit of press coverage. So he broke into another house owned by Tracy Pools, who lived with Manny Taboada, I want to say. Manny was the only male killed in his spree. He was killed trying to fend him off, and then Tracy went down the hall to try and see what the noise was and ended up getting killed herself. Again, bound, raped and stabbed in the back. Another suspect was originally pointed towards because he was in a car accident and he had scars all over his face, and the media and the police thought he was a good fit for news coverage and to call out the Ripper, which is a whole story about deformity and demonism, which is another story for another time. Although Jen Campbell does a really good video on that, so I'll link that in the description because I found that really, really interesting. So the Gainesville Ripper, his real name was Danny Rowling. He was arrested for a burglary, actually, and they found that his tools left similar marks to those left by the Gainesville Ripper when he was breaking into apartments. So they arrested him for that, and then he later confessed to killing 3 other people in Shreveport in 1989. So in total he killed 8 people. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection and was executed in 2006. That's the end of what I have today. I've done loads of research on other films and other stories that are based on true stories. There are things like true crime that is really, really interesting, but there's also horror films of the supernatural genre that are allegedly based on true stories. So if you would want me to talk about the supernatural as well, I'm perfectly happy to do so. I love the supernatural also. I might do True Crime Tuesdays and Supernatural Saturdays. I don't know, maybe. That sounds quite interesting to me. Do you know what? I don't need your permission. It's my channel. This is my gaff. I'm going to do what I like. That's what I'm going to do. True Crime Tuesdays and Supernatural Saturdays. It's happening. I've made it a thing. I will see you next time. If you're interested in true crime and writing and supernatural whatchamacallits, then subscribe, because there will be more. I'm really close to 100 subscribers at the moment, and I would like 100 subscribers because Ethan has 400 and I want to catch up. Because all he does is sit and play games. I actually put effort into mine. He just does what he normally does. I put effort into mine. I research, I put things together, I make notes. He just twats about on Call of Duty. I will link him in the description as well if you like gaming channels. He doesn't have a camera yet, but I can assure you he's very handsome.